what did you look like in high school? I guarantee you would not have recognized me if you saw me in high school. For one thing, I rocked a monstrous fro mullet with the party in the back and a mushroom up front, acid wash jeans that were practically painted on, and a painfully awesome zebra print muscle shirt, sometimes with a striper glove with the fingers cut off. I kid you not, that was me. Not to mention the fact that back then I was a complete idiot. I mean, like more than you're used to. Which is why I'm not entirely sure why our assistant principal, our vice principal, did what he did. I'll get to that in a minute. Because our friendship group, the guys that I was part of, and I told you a little bit about this, I think last week, were known as the party crowd. Not just that, we were the thieves and vandals. Like we were not, I was the nicest kid in a group of just wow. So this is why I'm a little confused, because one day after school, we were hanging around, driving around, looking for something to do, which is probably not a good idea for people of our caliber. So we were driving downtown and by Portage in Maine, if you're from Winnipeg, and saw our vice principal at a bus stop. Lo and behold, this is fun. Looking again for something to do, my buddy who's driving pulls over and we inch to a stop as he's looking to see who is this. My buddy in the passenger side rolls down his window and shouts out, "Hey little boy, you want some candy?" Now, little children or big children never get into cars with strangers, never take candy from strangers, and candy from cars and buses and white vans and all bad, okay? But this is what we did. We were like, "Hey, little boy, want some candy?" At which point the vice principal rolls his eyes at us and he looks around. Now, in my memory, I seem to recollect that there was some reason why he would not be wanting to wait at the bus stop. I can't remember if it was windy or raining or cold or something, but he just kind of like rolled his eyes at us, walked towards the car, opened the door, got in and said, "Shut up and drive." And so we ended up driving him to wherever he was headed. And I often kind of wondered, did he have any regrets for getting in the car with a bunch of hooligans back in the day? Just is probably not got great for his reputation. The people who are stealing things, breaking things, and drinking things, that combination, this is not maybe who you want to be seen with. I don't know if he had any regrets looking back at that, but what I do know is that every regret we have can be traced to giving in to a temptation. This is week 2 of our Tempted series, where we're diving in not to temptation, but to the mechanics of temptation so we can learn to overcome it. The idea that there are 3 kinds of temptation, and understanding the difference can make all the difference in how we resist, overcome them, and learn to live with fewer regrets. So this week, we're going to dive right in to the second kind of temptation. Last week we talked about the kind of temptation that seizes us, the kind that we're not tempted because we're particularly bad, we're just human. We haven't done anything stupid to put ourselves in that position. It's just part of being human. So the longer you're successful, the more you'll be tempted to be prideful, the more people attack you, the more tempted you're going to be tempted to retaliate, the more you accumulate, you're going to be tempted to be greedy, and so on and so forth. And so we found that the best way to overcome this kind of temptation in the moment is to look for the back door. Why? Because God promises there will be a way of escape. And what is that way of escape? How many of you remember from last week? What's the way of escape in the moment for a common temptation? It's to do the opposite of what you're being tempted to do. So if you're tempted to be prideful, humble yourself. Tempted with greed, give stuff away. This is the back door. Of course, the long-term way to escape common temptations and overcome them is to have a change of heart so that we don't just have to resist what's bad, we don't even want it anymore. And yes, that's possible. Now, this is a very different kind of temptation than the kind we fall into. Notice the language there. One seizes us, and it overtakes us. This one we fall into. And so it kind of leads us to believe there's some sort of trap being set. Now, the best way to explain what this is all about and to point our way forward is to take you to Jesus again. This is a refrain for me if you haven't picked it up already. Let's go to Jesus. Let's go to Jesus. Why? Because he shows us the way of escape, and he's the master at it. Why? He who was tempted in every way, yet as we are, did not sin. And so we're going to learn from him again. Now, this particular story takes place very close to the end of his earthly life and ministry. In fact, the evening he would be betrayed and taken into custody and then tortured and killed. That evening, he was already spending time with his disciples. He had washed their feet to show them the kind of servanthood he was calling them to, and led them through a Passover meal, which he kind of constituted to point to himself and what he was offering through his death and resurrection, this new kingdom, this new covenant that he was offering through his blood. And after that, and after Judas had excused himself from the table because he had given in to temptation, he takes the 11 and goes to a garden called Gethsemane, where he would face intense temptations himself. But watch how this story unfolds. It says that Jesus went with his disciples to a place called Gethsemane. It's an olive grove, which would have looked really twisted and sinister, probably in the darkness of that night. And he said to them, those 11, sit here while I go over there and pray deeper into the garden. And he took Peter and the two sons of Zebedee, that's James and John, along with him. So he takes 3 guys deeper into the garden with him, and he began to be sorrowful and troubled. Why? Because he knows the weight of the world is about to come resting on his shoulders, not because it's going to be foisted on him, but because he's welcoming it. This is why he's here, to release us from sin and death, but he knows that it's going to cost him his life. So, back in. Then he said to them, my soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me. Stay here with me and keep watch. Keep watch. Why? Because I know they're coming for me, but also because there are things happening in the spirit realm that you cannot possibly understand. But I do, because I'm the Son of God. So he's looking for moral support. Please be here with me. Now, what I want you to notice is he's just given them a command. This is not just some dude, a friend. This is the Son of God says, stay here and keep watch. So what they do next with this instruction is critically important, just like when Jesus gives us something to do. And they don't necessarily think anything in particular is at stake, but there always is. Now watch what happens next. Going a little farther into the garden, Jesus fell with his face to the ground and prayed. We know that he was praying agonizing prayers, sweating great drops of blood, crying out to God. And then after that round of prayer, it says that he returned to his disciples and found them sleeping. Couldn't you men keep watch for me for 1 hour? He asked Peter. I need to point out that he prayed for an hour. It is nighttime. They're exhausted. They've been marching through all of this opposition, seeing miracles happening, the threats of being arrested, and the political tensions rising, the powder keg starting to vibrate as though it might explode in Palestine, there in Jerusalem, for the Holy Weekend where all of the pilgrims are converging. And in the midst of this, they are presented with a temptation. Jesus gives them a challenge, a test. Stay here and watch with me. In the midst of that, they have a common temptation, and that is to just catch a few winks here and there. No one will ever know. And it's not something particularly evil. It's a human temptation. What's this common temptation? It's common to everybody. They're tired. And so they give in to temptation and they fall asleep. Now, again, the implications, the consequences of giving in to this particular temptation are small. Jesus comes back, he finds them sleeping, he's disappointed, probably hurts a little because he wanted them there for moral support. He's crying out, and they're just, they're just like, could you just, come on, just for 1 hour, guys, come on. But the implications, the consequences aren't that large. But look what he says next. He says, watch and pray, so that you will not fall into temptation. There's that word, that phrase, fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. He's essentially saying, look, you guys gave into the common temptation of falling asleep. I get it, you're tired. I wish you had been there for me. Not a biggie. But now something is shifting. You need to understand that in the spirit, there are things moving. There are players arriving. There are powers at work that want to destroy you. Traps are being laid even as we speak. And I guarantee you, if you don't sit and pray and watch with me, you will fall into the traps, the pits that have been dug for you. Now we know what happened next. They fell asleep again. Now, giving into temptation has far greater impact than it did the first time. It happens a third time. And what happens next is the torches, the snake of torches makes its way through the countryside, through the olive grove, as Judas leads the temple priests and guards to arrest Jesus. And the disciples, waking up in a start, are not prepared spiritually for what happens next. And they all fall into temptation. Peter whips out a sword and strikes the high priest's servant's ear, cuts it off. Jesus is like, come on, puts it back on, heals the guy. But Peter is not prepared to handle what's going on. The other disciples flee. Even John, we read, escapes barely. Somebody's grabbing hold of him and his garment comes off and he runs off half naked into the night. These followers he has loved and given himself for were not prepared for the temptation they faced, the trap that was laid for them, and they all fell into temptation. What I want to show you in this passage, and this is so critically important for the rest of us to understand, is that giving in to common temptations opens us up to more dangerous temptations. The first temptation, just fall asleep, just catch a few winks. Jesus is disappointed, not a big deal, but that brought them an inch closer. Now they're super sleepy, an inch closer to making a really dumb decision that would inevitably lead to them forsaking Jesus and leaving him when he wanted and needed them most. I don't know if you've ever thought of it this way, but advertising is a form of temptation. Let's just use that as an analogy. I know that some advertising kind of highlights important things and issues we need to see or products that we could really benefit from, but temptation takes the form of advertising. I would say advertising is like monetized temptation. That's essentially what advertising is. In other words, someone is trying to get our attention and they're trying to convince us, you really want it, you know you want it, you know you need it, so that we make a decision, right, to purchase their product or service. And so there's this tension going on. They're trying to alert you to your need so that you feel the wrestling match and let go of what you've known to embrace what they have to offer. This is very similar to what the enemy is doing with temptation. Now, here's a question. How many of you have ever clicked something online that you wish you hadn't clicked? Just put that in the comments. You don't have to say what it was. Just say, yep, I clicked. I clicked. Just put that in the comments if that's you. For example, maybe it was some, one-time offer that you couldn't resist. It was a certain kind of webinar or a training and you thought, oh, that sounds interesting. And you click and you regret that you clicked it. Maybe it was a Nigerian prince offering you his millions, and now you don't have millions, you're millions in debt. Maybe it was something as simple as, well, yes, I would like to know which kind of Marvel superhero I am. Click. And now all of your contacts are getting spam emails, and you click that one offer, and now every day you're getting emails, and you unsubscribe, which subscribes you to the next email, which you unsubscribe, and it's never ending. And now you've got to change your email, change your name, shave your head, get facial reconstruction surgery so that no one can recognize you. Right? Because as soon as you click some of those buttons, it seems so innocuous. It seems so simple and innocent, but it leads to things you didn't foresee. And I will tell you that we consistently underestimate the consequences of giving in to little temptations, the small choices that we make, and we constantly underestimate how hard it's going to be to say no to the option that presents itself after saying yes to the first one. Am I right? Come on, I know I'm right. Now, just to make sure that we remember what's at stake, I want to call these temptations that we fall into something you won't forget. Let's just call them from now on, we'll just call them death traps, okay? Because the wages of sin is... yes, death. The wages of sin is death. That means you give in to sin and it will pay back death. So there's always this sense of being lured into a trap that is set for you that the enemy intends to harm you with. So let's talk about this. Now, just to review a little bit of the mechanics of temptation, like we did last week. Remember this diagram if you're listening by podcast? This is the one that talks about a source of temptation, whether it's demonic, whether it's poor friendships, or whether it's advertising. Then we have the temptation itself, and we have those who are being tempted. When it comes to the temptation, we said it's like a double-sided coin. Number one, we have a sinful option presented to us, which then produces an inner battle within us. And the degree to which we're wrestling, whether we want something and don't want something, the degree to which we're wrestling there determines the strength of the temptation. What I want to point out to you today, and when it comes to these temptations we fall into, these aren't just common temptations, common to everyone. How many of you know that what the disciples experienced there was not just a common temptation in that garden? That was specially designed for them, in particular, after they had already given into the first layer of temptation. So here's what the enemy does. He knows good and well that if he presents us with a death pit, nobody in their right mind is going to go, really? Let me get a closer look. He's not going to go, hey, you want to ruin your life in 3 easy steps? Actually, let's make it simpler. 1 step, just jump. He doesn't do that. What he does is he puts something in front of the sinful option. You know what it is? It's an unwise option. In other words, the devil tempts us with foolishness long before he tempts us with sin. Do you understand this? So what happens is, he's not going to come to you and go, do you want to have an affair? Like just out of the blue. And you're like, well, I hadn't thought about it. Well, you should. Here are the benefits and here are the pros and cons. He doesn't work that way. What he'll do is he'll tempt you to do something unwise, like spending time with someone that you're attracted to alone. And is that a sin? Is that a sin to do that? According to the Bible, can you point to chapter and verse? No, it's not a sin, but it's unwise. It's foolish. And once you've done something foolish, you're open to more foolishness. And before you know it, you've done something stupid, and you don't know how you got there. How you got there is you listen to the temptation to do something unwise before you listen to the temptation to do something immoral. In other words, I want you to say this with me. Say this out loud. Stupidity multiplies temptation. Okay? Say it with me. Stupidity multiplies temptation. Say it like you mean it, because this is so true. This is so true, okay? And the opposite is also true. And this is where I want to go this morning. Wise choices create fewer temptations. Say that one out loud with me. Wise choices create fewer temptations. We already established last week that you can't get rid of all of the tempters in your life. You can't get rid of all those common temptations that seize us because we are just human beings and we're flawed and we're susceptible. You can't get rid of those, but you can eliminate every single temptation you would have faced had you made a foolish choice. Do you know how I know this? Let's talk about King Jesus again. Do you remember? Jesus never once sinned, which means he never gave in to temptation, which means he never had temptations that arose because he gave in to the first temptation. He never faced a temptation that arose as the result of his own stupidity, or because he had disobeyed God. Now he finds himself in a super awkward situation with a moral dilemma that he wouldn't have faced if he had just said yes to God. He never faced that. And he points us the way. He's the pioneer, the author of our faith. As we put our faith in Jesus and let him live his sinless life through us, he can show us how to overcome temptations, and in particular, to choose the way of wisdom. And so let's talk really quickly as I kind of wrap up here about eliminating your death traps. How many of you would like to eliminate the death traps? I want to warn you. I want to warn you to watch and pray. Why? Because your enemy, the devil, is like a roaring lion seeking whom he may devour. We are not unaware of his schemes, but he's looking to steal and kill and destroy you by tempting you into foolishness, and then after you've already crossed that line a few times, into immoral territory, into ways that will harm you. So how do we eliminate our death traps? How do we do that? Well, Jesus showed us the first one in the passage we studied. In the garden, in the darkness of the garden, in the inkiness of night, Jesus told them, watch and pray. Watch and pray. Why? So that you may not fall into temptation. He's saying this temptation, the only way you're going to be able to overcome it is to recognize it when it comes, so that when you see it, you go, aha! And then you know how to resist it because you've been listening to God and you have his wisdom. In other words, this is what we're looking for. When we're watching and praying, we're looking for what the enemy might be doing so that we can avoid foolishness and choose wisdom. The book of Proverbs is essentially that statement unpacked over 31 chapters. Those of you who know the book of Proverbs, you know what I mean. It's contrasting the foolish person who consistently makes his life or her life more difficult than it has to be, compounding their temptations and their immorality because of poor choices, or the wise who listen to counsel, listen to God, fear God, make wise choices, and as a result have fewer temptations to face. All right, so look at this part in this section of scripture from Proverbs 8. This is like a sampling from the book of Proverbs to illustrate what I'm talking about. It says that, blessed are those who listen to me. Who's that? Well, it's God, but it's wisdom personified. So it's God's wisdom personified as a person. Like if you could just talk to wisdom as a person. It's like a woman who is a fountain of knowledge and wisdom. So she says, blessed are those who listen to me, watching daily at my doors. There's that verse or that word, watching. Remember what Jesus told his disciples to do? Watch. Why? Because I have something for you. Waiting at my doorway, she says. Waiting for wisdom to come. Why? For those who find me find life and receive favor from the Lord. But those who fail to find me harm themselves. All who hate me love death. How's that for clear and black and white? Oh my goodness. If you love wisdom, you will find life and honor and favor. If you don't and you choose the way of foolishness, you are choosing to harm yourself. You're going to fall into the pits the enemy's dug for you, the traps that have been set for you. Unless you watch and pray and look for God's wisdom, you're going to do it. Now, part of the wisdom is, again, flipping these upside down, right? doing the opposite of what you're being tempted to do. But in certain situations, you need specific wisdom to navigate the complexities of the temptations that you're facing. And here's where the wisdom starts. Here's where the wisdom starts. Number 2, stop lying to yourself and to others. Now, I wanted to phrase this in a positive way, right? Choose truth. Tell yourself the truth. But the fact is that before we start telling ourselves the truth, we have to stop lying to ourselves and stop lying to others about how we're doing and how we're handling life. How many of you know that the first temptation you face is to start lying about how you're really doing and justifying why you said yes and why you had to say yes and why there was technically nothing sinful about the choice you made? No, but it was foolish. And it may not be sinful to be tempted, but it is sinful to put yourself into situations where you know you're going to be tempted on purpose. Multiplying the options for depravity in your life is not a wise thing to do. When I was a kid, there was a Sunday morning comic strip. Remember when the weekend paper would come and there was I remember the comics and their color. It was so awesome. Pages of these things. I remember a comic by a comic strip named Kathy. And I didn't read it very often. Actually probably read it every time because I just loved every comic. I didn't love that comic. But there was one that stood out to me and I couldn't find it online. I could probably break copyright if I showed you the picture, so it's probably good I didn't. A temptation that I chose wisdom on, but I will read you the text from that comic, which I was able to find. So she's in her home and she's thinking. She's kind of a neurotic soul, very, very funny. And in frame 1, she says, "I'll take a drive, but I won't go near the grocery store." Frame 2, "I will drive by the grocery store, but will not go in." Frame 3, "I'll go into the grocery store, but will not go down the aisle where the candy's on sale." Frame 4, "I will look at the candy, but not pick it up." Frame 5, "I'll pick it up, but not buy it." Frame 6, "I'll buy it, but not open it." Frame 7, "Open it, not smell it." Frame 9, "Taste it, but not eat it." Frame 10, eat. She's just... Now, I used to, I've preached on this before. I've used this example before. And I used to say, where did she lose the battle, right? Where did she lose the battle? In your own mind, where did she lose the battle? At what point in this progression was the battle already lost? Many of you point out, at frame 1, the moment she decided to take a drive, because the moment she starts taking a drive, she's then put herself at risk to going to the store, and that things lead to things, and that's where she lost the battle. I agree, except I would say that it's internal. I actually think she lost the battle the moment she started lying to herself about what she really wanted and what she was really after, what she was really doing. I think all along she wanted the candy and she's trying to create little steps, none of which are immoral, they're just unwise. And then it led to the moment where she did what she didn't want to do. How could she have avoided that? Don't lie to yourself and don't lie to other people when they ask you how you're doing and what you're struggling with. Tell them the truth. All right? Let's talk about the last one before I close, and that is to create personal guardrails. We're talking about how to eliminate your death traps. Number 1, watch and pray. That's the advice right from Jesus. Number 2, stop lying to yourself and to other people. And number 3, create personal guardrails. Have you ever wondered why there are guardrails like curbs on regular roads and guardrails along mountain passes? No, you haven't. Because you know that the purpose of a guardrail is to keep you driving in a particular way, in a particular direction, without interfering in any other obstacles and any other vehicles. The purpose of a guardrail is to keep you safe by keeping you on the path you're supposed to be on. Well, has it ever occurred to you that you can create personal guardrails for your heart and for your habits and for the temptations that you face. In this light, a personal guardrail is a rule that we set for ourselves that protects us from the slippery slope of our own stupidity, like Kathy's tumble into, gluttony and eating the candy and doing what she said she was not going to do. A guardrail keeps us from going over that edge. Now, the interesting thing, and Pastor Andy Stanley has a whole series on guardrails. He says that a guardrail is placed before the area of danger. It's not placed at the area of danger, or you still might go over. The purpose of a guardrail is to keep you away from danger. So you don't put it on the edge of a sin, you put it on the other side of foolishness. So it keeps you away from doing something foolish that could lead to something harmful. And the same principle applies in our own lives. How can we create guardrails that protect us from going where we ultimately don't need or want to go? Again, we consistently underestimate what's at stake and the temptations we face and how hard it will be to resist them. I like what Pastor Craig Groeschel of lifechurch.tv, I like what he says. He said it recently in one of the messages he was speaking. He says, why resist a temptation in the future when we have the power to eliminate it today? That's what a guardrail does. I make a rule now that I will not do something later to keep myself. So I keep myself from foolishness so I'm not tempted to do something immoral. When I was overcoming in my battle against lust and pornography, I mentioned that last week, one of my rules, one of my guardrails for years until I was ready for taking the guardrail off. One of the rules I imposed on myself is I couldn't go into a convenience store by myself, like Mac's or 7-Eleven. I couldn't go in by myself. Why? Because they got the section of the magazines there. And I knew that there's nothing immoral about going into a convenience store, but it wasn't wise for me to do that by myself. That was my rule. I couldn't go by myself because as soon as I crossed that wisdom barrier into foolishness, I would be tempted to do something immoral. And so I created a guardrail for myself until I'm ready to safely navigate that, which I am today. All right. Now let's wrap this whole thing up and let me challenge you with 3 questions that you can use to eliminate your own death traps. All right, here they are. Number 1, where are you currently flirting with temptation? All right, remember, what's the solution here? Tell the truth. Stop lying to yourself. If you're telling yourself that you're spending time with that coworker because you really need to get work done, but really it's a source of temptation because it feels good to be together alone, tell the truth. Stop lying to yourself. So in what area are you currently flirting with temptation and maybe lying to yourself? Tell the truth. Second question, what guardrail would be wise to set up between you and that temptation? Remember, don't rationalize going, well, it's not a sin to be with a coworker. Don't do it. Set up a guardrail according to wisdom, not folly, that will keep you from doing stupid stuff that will lead to immoral stuff. Okay, that's the second one. And then number 3, and this relates to the first one about telling the truth, who are you going to tell about this? Who are you going to tell so that they can hold you accountable for what's going on? When I made this rule and I ended up meeting Shauna, I was in the middle of my temptation battle and my porn battle. I was coming out of it, but I told her, by the way, I have covenanted before God and I'm covenanting with you. I will not go into a store alone, this kind of store alone, otherwise I'll... So I actually told her about my guardrail so that she could help me and support me in it. Well, I hope that's super helpful. Next week, we're going to dive right into the third kind of temptation, which is the kind that we're led into by God. And I know bing, 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 alarm bells are going off, so you're not going to want to miss that one. It's super powerful as well, super important to understand. Again, understanding the difference between these temptations can make all the difference in how we respond to them and how we overcome them. Let's take a little bit of time together today to worship Jesus together, to look to this author and perfecter of our faith, the sinless one, the spotless one, the one who has the grace to help us overcome. Let's choose and give him our intention, give him our energy, give him our commitment, give him our heart. And let's not hold back. I know it's weird. We're doing this in the living rooms. Let's make this all about him and sing our hearts out to him. Lift your hands to him. Give your heart to him in Jesus' name. Hey, thanks for tuning in. Glad that we could share this time together either through manifest.online.church, YouTube a little bit later, or maybe through podcast. I pray that God gives you wisdom to show you how you've been lying to yourself so you can start telling the truth, and then what kind of guardrails you can set up, who you can talk to so you can actually make progress with this. Now, if this podcast was helpful to you, this message was helpful to you, would you please pass this on to anyone you think it might benefit? Because our mission is to help everyone everywhere discover true life in Christ. There's got to be someone in your world that could benefit from this content. So pass that on. Have an amazing day. And just before we go, let me pray for you. Father God, thank you so much for joining us here, even in this online space. It's so weird because you transcend time and space, and now our messages do too. So God, would you infuse us with your spirit, with your grace, so that we can take this message and walk it out. In Jesus' name, amen. Have an amazing day.